I'm Anu Bhatnagar, your webinar executive. And today we have this another webinar that is related with the law managers in Indian banking system. Right, as we have seen that after a law graduation, there are so many fields in law like litigation, judiciary, uh, another services like you can go in UPSC, but there's one post that is there that is related with the law manager, and that is through IBPS Law Officer exam, right? And there are so many viewers who know what is IBPS Law Officer exam, and there are so many who don't know that what is IBPS Law Officer exam, right? So to give us a career guide, we have with us Mr. Shreyas, who is recently designated at the headquarter of bank in New Delhi. So we are very excited to have you, sir. Welcome to the webinar with LawSikho.
Thank you so much, Anu, for the introduction. And if I may just begin with just an introduction about myself. So basically, I did my graduation in law from the University of Calcutta, and then I did my post graduation in law from IIT Kharagpur, Rajiv Gandhi School of IP Law, and then I worked as a research assistant in IIT Kharagpur for a brief period. After which I practiced as a advocate before the Calcutta High Court for a year, and thereafter I joined as a law manager in Punjab and Sind Bank, which is a public sector bank. So I've been working there for the past 1 year, and I've been posted at the head office of the bank in New Delhi.
Right. So that's a quite good brief description which you told us. Sir, could you please tell us your working as a law manager in banking system?
Yes, definitely. So I'll like to begin, by giving you a brief background about the Indian banking sector with, a special focus on India. So basically, if you look at the history, like before 1969, there was only one public sector bank, which was the State Bank of India. And the government felt that, in order to for the growth of the economy, we need more public sector banks which will act on behalf of the government and will help in the implementation of government schemes. So this led to the nationalization of various private banks, which happened in two phases. First, it happened in the year 1969, which was the first Bank Nationalization Act was enacted, and around 11 public sector banks were nationalized. Then the second wave happened in 1980, when 6 more public sector banks were nationalized. So, and the reason for them for the nationalization was because these banks were to be used as a tool for economic growth. So, if today, if you see, if you compare today, the Indian banking sector has basically two types of banks. One is the private sector banks, which are the famous banks are HDFC Bank, ICICI Bank, Axis Bank, Kotak Mahindra Bank. And you have, on the other hand, the public sector banks, which is like the State Bank of India, Punjab National Bank, Bank of Baroda, etc. So there's a huge distinction between the working of private banks and public sector banks. While the regulations more or less are same for all the banks, which is basically they all are governed by the Banking Regulation Act, and they are regulated by the Reserve Bank of India. But the public sector banks have more emphasis on what is known as the priority sector lending. So what comes under priority sector lending is basically the agriculture and allied services, first of all. Then you have student loans. Then you have loans given to the weaker sections of the society, like people who belong to the low income group, or people who are, for example, the marginal farmers, or basically farmers. So because of the emphasis, this emphasis is there because a bank, the government has various schemes, like for example, if you talk about the Mudra scheme, recently it is very famous. Then you have the Jan Dhan Yojana. So these are basically these schemes are basically there for bringing about inclusive growth in the Indian society. So it is not that just people of one section of the society will grow, but they want people who are in the who are poor, or people who work in the agriculture sector, even they should also grow. So this is the distinction between public sector banks and private sector banks. While if you see like the private sector banks have more emphasis on certain financial products, like for example credit cards or certain kinds of corporate loans. Public sector banks have more emphasis on priority sector lending. So this is basically the background of the Indian banking sector, like especially with regard to the public sector banks. And it is in this context that we have to move forward with the this discussion.
Right. Oh, as
Yeah.
you have told us the background of Indian banking system, which is with related to public sector. So
Yes.
now comes the need of law manager. That is very important. That what is the need of law managers in public sector uh, bank?
Banks.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. So basically, I would just like to first, tell you about the Basel norms. This is very important because, Basel is basically a place in Switzerland. And the Basel Committee for Bank Supervision was set up in around the late 1980s and the early 1990s, which was basically there for, the regulation of various risks that the banks face. So basically, it was a way of risk management that the Basel norms were set up. And right now we have implemented the Basel 3 norms. Like this is the third phase of the Basel norms, which was brought into force after the 2007-2008 financial global recession, basically. When the banks were in the center of the recession, and it was felt that banks need greater regulation, like in the form of self-regulation, to mitigate the risks that banks face in the banking sector. So, as part of the Basel 3 norms, basically, the Reserve Bank of India, which is basically the regulator, market regulator of the Indian banking sector, they have said, because they conduct lots of like audits and inspections of public sector banks, mostly public sector banks, because as you already know, like the public sector banks were nationalized. So the government has a huge ownership in all the public sector banks. They have around, like if you consider all the like 11 to 12 public sector banks presently in India, so they will have around 60 to 70%, maybe even more percentage of ownership in these banks. So the government basically controls these banks firstly through their nominees in the board of directors of these banks, and secondly they also do it through the Reserve Bank of India's inspection and audit. So during their inspections, the Reserve Bank of India has observed that public sector banks need specialized officers to mitigate the risks. And one kind of specialized officer is law managers. So basically, the reason why law managers are needed is basically they will help in mitigating the risks, because law managers will not only they of course they will look after the litigations of the banks, but they also have a huge role in to play in as an in-house officer, where they do vetting of documents, they provide legal opinions. So law managers have the need for law managers was actually felt by Reserve Bank of India, and they have asked all the public sector banks to recruit more and more law managers over the years. So if you see, like for example, as you mentioned, the IBPS Specialist Officer exam. This is basically a recruitment done at the level of assistant manager, and this is a common exam for all the public sector banks. And but then you have recruitments also at higher posts, like in the post of managers, chief managers, even assistant general managers, direct recruitments, where of course you require certain amount of work experience. And so this is basically done to fulfill the requirement that Reserve Bank of India has given to all the public sector banks to have more and more law managers, so that they can help in the mitigation of risks that are faced by the banks.
Right.
Yeah.
As you have correctly stated, the needs of the law managers in Indian banking system. Okay.
Yes.
Now comes the role or the demand of particular law manager in Indian banking system. As we have seen that there are so many lawyers are there. So how it is different from a ordinary lawyer who graduate from law school and a person who is
Right.
being recruited as a law manager. So, like, could you please tell us about that?
Yes, definitely, Anu. So basically, like if you like look at the role of law managers in banking sector, in the generally in the public sector banks, then you will find that law managers have a very important role to play as in-house lawyers or as in-house professionals, where they do a lot of things. Like of course, we are law managers, we are advocates by profession, but we are also at the same time bankers. So law managers in public sector banks consider themselves bankers first and lawyers second, because you have to do everything from the perspective of banks, and you have to protect the bank's interest. So that is where, there's a slight difference in perspective compared to, lawyers who are practicing in courts, because lawyers, they will of course try to protect their client's interest, but in case of law managers, they will always try to protect the bank's interest, and they will also do a lot of things from the perspective of banking. So banking knowledge is very important, and if you see, like, law managers, they are continuously trained in the banking sector, and they are continuously, imparted knowledge with regard to banking sector. Like, law managers have to give certain exams with regard to banking knowledge, almost on a monthly basis. And then you have certain certification courses which are conducted by Indian Institute of Banking and Finance, which is also imparted to increase the banking knowledge of not only generalist officers, or like probationary officers, but also specialist officers like law managers. And further, I would like to just talk more about the role of law managers vis-a-vis the Indian courts and tribunals. So firstly, although like there is a lot of in-house work to be done for law managers, but they also have to do a lot of work with respect to courts and tribunals. So the courts that law managers have to frequently visit and stay in touch with are firstly the Debts Recovery Tribunal, or the DRT, then the DRAT, which is the Appellate Tribunal. Then you have the consumer forums, various forums, right from district level to the national forum. Then you have the Central Information Commission, which is an authority established under the RTI Act, where the second appeals generally are made to the CIC. And then you have all the various civil courts, as well as the Supreme Court, High Courts, and also the Supreme Court. And of course, you also have certain litigations in criminal courts, because the all the litigations with regard to check bounce cases under the Negotiable Instruments Act are basically criminal, in the form of criminal cases, which are done in the court of magistrates. So basically, you also have to go to the criminal courts. So this is, although like you have a lot of in-house work, but you also have to on a daily basis stay in touch with and liaise with various lawyers of various courts and tribunals that I've just mentioned. And you also have to do continuous follow up with the advocates who are working in these courts and tribunals. And sometimes you may even have to go to the courts, and like in case of like consumer forums, you can also appear on behalf of the bank, because it's a tribunal, so it's not necessary that you will be represented by an advocate. So if there is an emergency, if the advocate is not like available, then you can also appear on behalf of the bank. The same is true also in the case of Central Information Commission for RTI second appeals. Also sometimes it happens before the Debt Recovery Tribunal. And of course it's not possible to appear before the courts, like the civil courts or criminal courts or High Court or Supreme Court, because there only the advocates can appear, so as per the Advocates Act. So as so far as the tribunals are concerned, so you can, as law managers, we can always appear before the tribunals.
Okay,
So
so as you said that a law manager needs to appear before a Indian court and tribunals.
right.
So as we have seen that there are so many legal challenges also which is faced by the law manager, right? So could you please tell us about the challenges which are faced by the law managers, as well as is there any training program which is provided to the law managers during their probation period?
Absolutely. So, Anu, basically, when we talk about the various legal issues and challenges which are faced by law managers, then the legal issues and challenges, they mostly arise in the implementation of the recovery laws. For example, when we talk about recovery laws, we talk about the SURFACI Act, which is basically for enforcement of security interests without going to the courts. Then you have the Recovery of Debts Act. Previously, it was called RDDBFI Act. Now it has been renamed as Recovery of Debts Act, where you all the like cases, all the NP accounts where the outstanding amount is more than 20 lakhs. there we can directly file a case before the DRT under the Recovery of Debts Act. Then apart from this, we have the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, of course, where we have as financial creditors, we can move the National Company Law Tribunal for recovery of our dues. And sometimes, like we do it individually as banks, and sometimes we also do it as a consortium of banks, because all the big loans, if you talk about the for example the ILFS case, or the Diwan Housing DHFL case. So in all these cases, not one public sector bank, but like multiple public sector banks were involved. So they collectively filed the case in the NCLT. So basically, now when we talk about issues, for example, I'll just give you like certain illustrations. If we talk about the SURFACE Act, so basically the process under Section 13 is quite simple. We first of all we give a demand notice, then the borrower replies to that notice, and if we have to reply to that note, the reply within 15 days. And if it is not satisfactory, then we can straight away go for physical possession of the property which is mortgaged with the bank. And then we can also go for from symbolic possession, we can also go to physical possession, wherein we take the assistance of DMs, district magistrates, for taking physical possession. So basically this process is very simple. But the issues that come up is, once we take possession of the property which is mortgaged to us, then we have to sell those properties, we have to auction those properties. That is where there are a lot of issues that are coming, because like for example, I'll give you an example of this lockdown. Because of this lockdown, moratorium has been given by the government, where the borrowers have been first of all allowed not to pay their like installments, and they will not be declared as NPAs. But this benefit is only there for the borrowers, and it is not there for maybe like auction purchases, who are trying to participate in the sale of through auction of various properties which are taken possession by the bank. So in these cases, like there are a lot of issues, whether we should extend this moratorium to the auction purchases, or suppose this auction we have done it once and it fails, then can we do it again? Or like for example, if we do that auction once again or twice or thrice, and then we get a buyer, and the buyer deposits the earnest money amount, but then what is the time period in which he has to pay the remaining amount? The of course the acts, the rules, the SURFACE rules, they basically state that 90 days are there. But like what if the money is received after 90 days? So these are some issues that we face under the SURFACE Act. Similarly, we have like in case of Recovery of Debts Act, when we get a decree by the DRT, then the proceedings go for automatic execution before the recovery officer. So when the recovery officer takes up the proceedings, and then there are a lot of issues with regard to the sale of the property. There are a lot of technicalities involved. So in those cases also there are a lot of complications which as law managers we have to resolve. Then the same thing is also there in case of insolvency bankruptcy code, where if the CIRP process is initiated, and the matter goes to the committee of creditors, and committee of creditors take a lot of decisions by themselves. So in those cases there are a lot of administrative decisions to be taken, and sometimes we may feel that we want to withdraw the proceedings. So, and there are so many other things that we can do once the matter is before the committee of creditors. So there are a lot of issues that we are faced with as law managers. And then of course finally I would like to talk about the Limitation Act, because under the Limitation Act there are a lot of important like Limitation Act has a lot of implications, because when we deal with loan documents, so loan documents they are bound by Limitation Act. So if we do like there are certain provisions in Limitation Act which talk about the renewal of extension of the limitation period, or like what do we do to extend the limitation period. So and there are certain cases like in certain states we also go for various other, like apart from the conventional recovery acts, we also go for some other form of recovery acts, like which are called the recovery through revenue officer recovery through so that is there mostly in Madhya Pradesh, where we go directly to the revenue collector and we say that this a person is not paying the loan, so we have to recover it. So in those cases also, whether that will amount to extension of the limitation period or not. So these are some of the like legal issues and challenges that as law managers we face. So we have to be very well versed with the acts that I've just mentioned, and not only the acts but also the rules and also the latest judgments that come with regard to these acts. So that is, I think, the issues that we face usually.
Right. As you said, that there are so many challenges you face. So I asked this question, like, like, do you, as a law manager, has this training
Yeah,
something
of course.
like?
Yeah, that is something I missed. So basically, like when we join as law managers, when we are recruited, we like mostly we have a training program. Sometimes we may not have a training program because like for example, if no training is going on during that time, so maybe we will like be asked to join our place of posting, and we will have a training later on. But in most more often than not, we like as soon as we join as law managers, we are taken for a training program, which is basically in the form of an induction program, where we are basically introduced with the functions of a law manager and what are the issues and challenges that we face as law managers. So there are various institutions. There are certain institutions which like multiple banks have set up, and there are also certain like every bank has its own training institution where we go for trainings. So that is of course something that happens when we join as law managers, but subsequently also almost like like every year we have 2 to 3 trainings where on various issues, like we can have training maybe on the negotiable instruments act, or on the insolvency bankruptcy code, and then we have training on surfacy act. So we have various like specialized trainings also, and as well as generalized trainings. At the same time, we also have trainings with regard to just general banking. So law managers, they are not just limited to they are not just allowed for like like legal training, but we are also allowed for banking related trainings. So training is something that continuously happens, and apart from that also basically we have to appear for certain exams. These are in the form of online tests which happen almost every month, where we on various subjects, like maybe it can be on priority sector, or maybe it can be on alternate delivery channels, or it can be on law. So we have various kinds of tests that we have to prepare and appear for, and these the like the marks we score in these tests, they carry weightage when we have our annual appraisal. At the same time, they also have an influence on our promotions. So, and at the same time, I would also like to specifically mention about 2 courses, or rather certification exams, which is one is the JAIIB, which is also called the Junior Associate, and the other is CAIIB, which is called the Certified Associate. These are 2 exams which are basically conducted by the Indian Institute of Banking and Finance, and this is basically like conducted for the public sector banks. But then again, there is a diploma course which is for like those people who are not law managers, but nevertheless they are lawyers, or otherwise also you can always appear, if even if you're not uh, you know um, working for a public sector bank, you can appear for the diploma course. And apart from that, you have various certification courses, like a certification course for credit professional, or forex management, or various other courses which are also conducted by the Indian Institute of Banking and Finance. So this is basically a very important body which conducts training. And apart from that, the banks themselves conduct trainings, and also they invite various bodies and various companies to train us also. So training is a continuous process that happens for law managers, and it's also very important because we keep updating ourselves, and keep expanding our knowledge through these trainings. So definitely there are a lot of trainings that are conducted for law managers.
Right, right. As you have briefly told us about the training and the issues and challenges you face.
Yes.
Right, like my next question that comes up in our mind, that as we have seen that in every organization or institution, there is some hierarchy which every institution follows up.
Right.
Do we have some hierarchy in law managers and banking system as well? If yes, please let us know.
Definitely. So I'll just briefly tell you about the hierarchy of the banks. Basically, almost all banks except for SBI, which has a slightly different nomenclature, all banks, they start with the position of clerk, which is also called the junior management. Then we move on to the middle management, which starts with the assistant manager. Then you have manager, then you have senior manager, and that's it. So that is the basically the middle management. Then we have the senior management, which starts from the position of chief manager. And chief manager's position is very important because in the SURFACI Act, chief managers act as authorized officers. So chief manager's post is very important, and it is the beginning of this senior management. So you have chief manager, then you have assistant general manager, then deputy general manager, and finally you have the general manager. After which those general managers, who have a residual period of service of more than 2 years, they're eligible for posting as executive directors and also as managing directors. So there's a separate recruitment board for that, which is called the Banking Board Bureau, which conducts the recruitment of executive directors and managing directors of various public sector banks. Now, coming to law managers are basically recruited in two posts primarily. Firstly is the assistant manager post, which is also called the MMGS Scale 1 or Middle Management Scale 1. And secondly, you have recruitment on the post of manager, which is the also called MMGS Scale 2. So let us talk about firstly the post of assistant manager. What we famous like which is famous as the IBPS SO exam. So specialist officer is another name for assistant manager law. Okay, and similarly you have the post assistant manager without any specialization, or a generalist assistant manager, is also called a PO or a probationary officer. So which is also a very famous exam like SBI PO or IBPS PO. So now coming to the post of assistant manager law, basically they are recruited mostly in big banks like Bank of Baroda or Punjab National Bank, where you have a huge structure like for the bank. When you start from the branch level, then you go to the regional offices, then you have circle offices, then you have zonal offices, and finally you have the head office. So like the assistant manager law or the specialist officer is mostly posted in the like the regional office or the circle office, sometimes even the zonal office. And there like because assistant manager position does not require any work experience, so they like mostly freshers go for like apply for these posts. And of course like your because you don't have requires too much of experience, so you can handle the matters, you have less pressure also as an assistant manager. And but when you talk about like certain banks like the bank that I work in, we don't have recruitment at the post of assistant manager. So we have recruitment directly in the post of manager level, which is the MMGS scale 2. This also happens in all the other banks. So the only difference between recruitment of assistant manager and manager law is that for the post of assistant manager, you have a common exam. Like the IBPS SO exam is a common exam for all the public sector banks. So when you fill up the form, application form for the IBPS SO, at the end of the like when you fill the form, at the end you will be asked basically your preference. So you can give your preference according to which bank you want to go to. And or you have to give your preference for all the banks, and accordingly based on your ranking and based on the marks that you obtain, you will be placed in the public sector banks. And but when you talk about the post of manager law, the recruitment is done by individual banks. So every bank will conduct recruitment for the post separately for the post of law managers. Of course, the conducting body is same, which is the IBPS. IBPS is basically an association of all the public sector banks. So they conduct the recruitment for all the recruitments except for SBI, which conducts its own recruitment for both assistant manager as well as law manager, like assistant manager, generalist, and also the specialist officers. But apart from that, like if when you talk about like the assistant manager post, there's a common exam for all banks, and manager post there's a like separate exam conducted by each bank. So that is, and of course I would also like to mention that IBPS also conducts the promotions of not only law managers but also like generally the promotion of employees of the bank. So IBPS is a very important body, but it's not a public institution like banks. So it's an association. So this is basically the hierarchy of managers. in the banks.
Right. So, as we like you have already told us about the background, the role, or the need of law managers. Now, I believe that comes a very important question that is about recruitment. So the viewers are keenly to ask what is the recruitment process, how it works, and when a aspirant can appear for these examinations. So please give us a brief about the recruitment process.
Certainly, Anu. So basically, the recruitment is conducted as I pointed out earlier, that it is conducted in two posts. One is the post of assistant manager, the other is the post of manager. Now, let us talk about the assistant manager post, which is also called the specialist officer. So basically, the recruitment is not just conducted for lawyers, but it is also done for chartered accountants, company secretaries. Then you have civil engineers, then IT officers, and various other specialized positions. So now basically the conducting body is called IBPS, and if you go to their website, you will find the details of all the recruitments. Now there are, apart from public sector banks, there are also banks called the regional rural banks. So every state has certain regional rural banks or RRBs. They also have they also recruit law managers. So IBPS conducts the recruitment for those banks also. Okay, so now basically for the post of IBPS SO, firstly, I will tell you about the eligibility. So basically, you have to have a law degree. But I think those who are appearing for the final exams, they are also eligible, but you have to check for that. But apart from that, of course, you have to have a law degree, and then you do not require any work experience. Okay. Now, and of course, I think they may not have a requirement also for enrollment as an advocate, but you have to check that, because during my time, I think there was no such requirement. So you don't have to be enrolled as an advocate also. But in some recruitments, like for the post of manager, they will specifically ask that you are enrolled as an advocate, and you have to give your enrollment number, and also the proof that you have passed the All India Bar exam. Okay, so this is one aspect. The second aspect is when you talk about the age. So basically, for assistant managers, the age limit is 30 years. So basically, and also there is no work experience that is required. So this is a very good exam, recruitment exam, for especially for freshers who have just graduated, or people who have graduated and have maybe worked for a year or two. So for them it's a very good exam. And now if you talk about the syllabus of the exam or the pattern of the exam, so firstly, the like IBPS SO exam has a firstly a preliminary stage. In the preliminary exam, you have basically English, then you have GK, and I think you also have reasoning ability. You don't have most probably maths, but it's always good to have knowledge of maths. But then the more emphasis is laid on English and GK. So this, and also in the case of GK, you have a certain portion which covers the current GK, and a certain portion which covers the static GK. So static GK is something that it's something you cannot build like in a like a short period of time. It is something that happens gradually. So you have to read various books, which I will come to later. So and then apart from that, so the preliminary exam has mostly English, GK, and reasoning. Then there is the mains exam. So those who qualify for the preliminary exam, they're eligible for sitting for the mains exam, wherein you have only the legal portion. There is no other section, just the law. And the syllabus covers basically all the general laws that you study during your PA, or LLB. And apart from that, you have certain specialized laws, like the recovery acts, like the SURFACE Act, Recovery of Debts Act, IBC, and also the RBI Act and the Banking Regulation Act. So the questions that usually come from these like RBI Act or Banking Regulation Act, they are very direct questions. So they are basically asking you various sections which deal, for example, section which deals with nomination, or sections which deals with lockers. So all these are very general questions, and you just have to have a very good reading and knowledge of the bare acts. So there are very few application based questions or problem based questions which you basically find in judiciary exams. So it's a very straightforward exam, and it's based on a very elementary knowledge. And of course, after and once you complete your mains exam, and the prelims exam, then you have the interview. An interview is conducted by IBPS, and there are various panels, and it's conducted across the India in various cities for the convenience of the candidates. So this is a three-tier process where you have firstly prelims, mains, and interview. Now, like coming to the recruitment for the post of manager law, you have only two levels. One is the written exam. There's only one written exam, and there is the interview. And for the post of assistant, for the post of manager law, firstly you require to have a law degree, and you also require to have at least 2 to 4 years of work experience. So this is, and also the age limit for manager law is 35 years of age. So basically, this is the difference between assistant manager and manager. While in assistant manager position, there is no requirement for work experience. For the post of manager, they require experienced people. So they will mostly look at experience as a lawyer, not of course experience working in law firms, or various other organizations will also count, but primarily the experience should be after you have been enrolled as an advocate. So that is very important. And this is the basic distinction between assistant manager or SO and manager law. Now coming to the books that you can refer to. So there are a lot of guidebooks available for especially for IBPS SO exams. Like general guidebooks is particularly with regard to English, reasoning, and GK, which is common for the like the PO exams. But they are very confusing, and if you read those books, you will be like confused. So it's better, like rather than going for these books, I would suggest that you go for magazines, which a very famous magazine. There are two good magazines. One is the BSc magazine, which is also called the Banking Services Chronicle, and the other is Pratyogita Kiran. So BSc magazine and Pratyogita Kiran are two very good magazines, which will basically, first of all, they will give you a lot of information on current affairs or GK. So that is something that is very important, because a lot of questions are asked with regard to the banking sector or with regard to the financial sector. So that is something you will get easily in these magazines, and these are monthly magazines. So they are published every month, and they will give you information of all the latest happenings and latest events, right from the financial sector also to the general knowledge. For example, all the tournaments like sports tournaments, or like Nobel prizes, and so many other things. So they are very comprehensive. And then they also have like the papers, like questions and answers of various exams that are conducted, right from the insurance exams to various like bank PO exams, and all the exams where like which have a very common pattern, like they have English, GK, reasoning, and maths. So they have so many question papers, and if you solve these question papers, you will be acquainted with the latest trends, because the pattern keeps on changing. Like maybe in English you will not have too many variations, but um, when you talk about reasoning and when you talk about like GK, there are different patterns. So you have to be familiar with the latest patterns, and that is something you can easily get through these two magazines, BSc magazine and Pratyogita Kiran. And when you talk about the legal portion, you have to just study the Bare Act. That is the only thing that you have to study, and it obviously won't harm you if you like refer to the previous year question papers. So that is always a good thing, that you get a question bank. I think they are available in the market. So just go through the previous year question papers to acquaint yourself with the pattern of questions. But when you talk about and also these exams, like particularly IBPS SO is conducted annually, and it's, I think, during the like this time of the year only they are conducted, along with IBPS PO or SBI PO exams. So you have to basically, when you appear for these exams, you have to have a knowledge for the previous 12 months. Like when you talk about GK, you have to cover the GK of previous 12 months. So that is very important. So basically you have to know, like if you are appearing in 2020, then you have to know all the current events that have happened from January 2019 till date. So this is something that you will get from these magazines. And of course you have various GK capsules available online. There's plenty of resources available online, even on YouTube, you can always follow that. But if you want to like base your preparation on certain books, then I think these magazines are very good. And of course the bare X. So this is like something on the recruitment process.
Right. Sir, as you told us about the detailed process of recruitment, as we have seen that there are certain sites which create these opportunities. So, pertaining to this particular law manager recruitment opportunities, do we have to do we have any special site where we can see these recruitment opportunities, or we have to separately check each and every can you hear me? Hello?
Very sorry. So basically, when you talk about the recruitment of IBPS SO, the most important site is the IBPS website itself. If you go to the IBPS website, you will find information with regard to recruitments that have been conducted in the previous years, and also the recruitment which will be conducted in this year or like like the coming years. So that is a very good source, a very good website for the recruitment information. And apart from IBPS SO, when you talk about recruitment of manager law, basically you have to check the websites of all the individual banks. So all the PSU banks have their own websites. You have to refer them. And like even the SBI, they have recruitment for the post of manager. They, I don't think, recruit for the post of assistant manager. So if you go to the career section of these banks, you will find the recruitment details. So if you want to just have an idea, you can get the information of the last exam that has been conducted in these websites. So IBPS website is there, and apart from that, you also have the individual banks website that you can refer to.
Right, so okay. The next question that comes up into aspirant mind, that in these days there's so much of competition, right? And when an aspirant is preparing for these services like IBPS, and we have seen there are very little opportunities. Like we have seen that whenever the LIC or any other bank came up with these opportunities, we have very little. What we can say a space for a person, right? For example, two or three. So do you advise people to solely prepare for this examination, or they can also look up to the other services which are there? So we would like to have some insight on that, because competition is tough, and people should have backup of something. So please tell us something about that.
Definitely. So, Anu, basically, that's a very good question. And, it's like definitely not, advisable to prepare for just one exam alone. And, here you have an advantage, because if you look at IBPS SO exam or the manager law exam, or for that matter, even like other exams, like, for example, the exams conducted by the insurance companies, like there are four public sector insurance companies. Which is NICL, NIACL, OICL, and UICL. And then you have the Life Insurance Corporation, which also has a separate. They conduct exams, and I think Life Insurance Home Finance is also there. They also conduct exams. So there are so many public sector undertakings or public sector companies which conduct recruitments. And if you look at the pattern of all these exams, they are very similar. So you will definitely have general knowledge, and you will have law, and you will have reasoning. These three sections, and also English. So these four sections, GK, English, reasoning, and law, will be common for all the exams. So if you are preparing well for these subjects, you can appear for all exams. So it's not necessary that you have to dedicate 1 year entirely for just banking sector. You can all, like, whatever preparation you are doing, you can use it for appearing for all the public sector exams, where be it those because broadly the recruitment can be divided into two parts. One is the for recruitment for freshers, which is mostly for the age limit will be 27 to 30 years, and they will not require any work experience. Or the age limit will be 35 years, and they will require at least 2 to 4 years of work experience. That is the only difference that you will find in the eligibility. Apart from that, when you talk about the pattern, as I mentioned, GK, English, reasoning, and law is common for all these exams. And when I'm talking about exams, I'm talking about specifically law managers. And of course, like law managers, as lawyers, we don't have to restrict ourselves to just positions of law managers. We can also apply for generalist positions. For example, like a few years back, the Insolvency Bankruptcy Board of India, or IBBI, had conducted a recruitment for the post of assistant manager. So in that exam, many lawyers had also cracked the exam and had been selected. So it is not that as law managers we have to restrict ourselves only to specialized positions or the positions of law managers. We can also apply for generalist positions. We can, for example, we can apply for PO, SBI PO, or IBPS PO. It all depends on your level of preparation. If it's not that you cannot compete with like people like engineers, or for that matter, people who appear for the generalist exams, you can always do that. If you're well prepared, you can definitely do it. And I know people who have cleared these generalist exams. So I think if you collectively look at all the recruitments that are conducted by the public sector banks, then you have plenty of positions. So if you are preparing just for banking sector, or for example, if you're preparing for the insurance sector, so nothing should stop you from appearing for the other exams. Like recently, this SEBI is conducting recruitment for the post of assistant manager law, and also for the position of assistant manager general, like no specialization. So nothing should stop, if you're preparing for banking exams, nothing should stop you from appearing for the SEBI exam also, or for that matter any other exam. So you just have to be on the lookout for opportunities. And if you while I talk about public sector organizations, there are regulators like SEBI, IBBI, then you have NCLT, then you have Reserve Bank of India. They also conduct Insurance and Regulatory Development Authority, IRDAI, or NABARD, or SIDBI. These are basically financial institutions and also regulators. So all of them conduct recruitment for specialized and generalized positions. So you can appear for both specialist and generalist positions. So nothing should stop you. And like when you decide to prepare for any of these exams, you should give yourself at least 6 months to 1 year, because you will take some time to get acquainted with the pattern. These like when you talk about reasoning and GK or English, they are not very difficult. But what is important is like the time management, because these exams, they are time bound exams, and maybe you will have 2 hours or maybe 1.5 hours. So you have to be very quick. So you may you may have a lot of knowledge, but what is important is you have to answer those questions in a very short time. You have to be very quick. So that speed is something that you will acquire only through diligent practice. That is something you cannot acquire overnight. So if you're thinking of appearing for these exams, give yourself a good 6 months to 1 year of preparation, where you can repeatedly practice all the practice papers, mock papers. You have plenty of these papers available, like practice papers available online. Okay, there are various I don't want to take names, but there are various sites or various organizations which give offer you like crash courses, like mock papers, test series and all. You can always appear subscribe to these various courses, and practice all the questions, and I think you will be like very well prepared for these exams.
Right. So you have clearly stated that one could not stick themselves to one particular examination. They can prepare simultaneously for other examination, right? So, sir, there is this next question that is coming up from Shubhangi. She's asking, is there any specific course is required for this particular post? And the another question that is coming from Shiv Sai, and he's asking about that how often these notification turns up, like what is the frequency of the opportunity in a year? Yes, sir.
So when I talk, first of all, I'll address the first question, like if whether you have to appear for any course or something. I think like she's referring to maybe some kind of a coaching course or something like that. So I will tell you my experience. Personally, I have not taken any sort of coaching or any sort of assistance in that manner. I have of course applied for taken the help of test series and mock papers. So I think that is all that is required, because of course you can always appear for, you can join these courses, there is no harm in it. But it all depends on whether you have the time for it. Like when I was preparing for this exam, I was working, I was practicing as an advocate, so I did not have the time to join any of these courses. So what I did was I relied heavily on the magazines that I told you, BSc magazine and Pratyogita Kiran. These magazines have really helped me in my preparation. So I
Sir,
don't think
your voice is not audible.
just a minute.
Yes.
Is it audible now?
Yes,
Yeah.
sir. Yes.
So I was just saying, that I have not basically relied on any particular coaching. I have only relied on these magazines. One is the BSc magazine and Pratyogita Kiran, which have greatly helped me in preparation for all these subjects. So, and I would also like to and addressing the second question, which is what was it? What was the second question?
That was related to the notification, its frequency, like.
Yeah, yeah. So basically, when you talk about the IBPS SO exam, it is conducted every year. Okay. So and it often, the exam is conducted during the month of January, from December to January, the prelim exam. So the notification will most probably come, around August to November, and you will get maybe 1 or 2 months to apply for the posts, and then you have the prelim exam in the month of maybe December or January. So like you have to be on the lookout from August onwards. And sometimes because this year we have had the COVID crisis, and also because of that, all the recruitments have been postponed, if not cancelled. So mostly I think in this year the notifications will be slightly delayed, but definitely they will be coming, because the requirement for law managers is like always there. And you have especially in all the public sector organizations, you have like retirements, and you have people leave jobs. So every year their vacancies are created, and you have like new positions are coming up. So the vacancies are created almost every year. So particularly with regard to IBPS SO exam, it is conducted every year. So you just have to follow the IBPS website, which will give you the notifications. And when you talk about the position of manager law, which is conducted by individual banks, then you have to refer to their websites. But that is something, like you have various kind of aggregators which give you these job notifications. So you can always subscribe to these aggregators, which will keep you updated about these things. But mostly when you talk about IBPS SO, it is annual. And when you talk about manager law, it is like the big banks, like for example SBI, they conduct recruitment almost every 2 years, definitely. So like this year they had taken out the notification for SBI deputy manager. A deputy manager is equivalent to manager in other banks. Okay, so basically they have assistant manager, then deputy manager, and then manager, which is equivalent to senior manager in other banks. That is the difference in nomenclature. But they basically are recruiting in the post of manager, and not in the post of assistant manager or SO. So basically they have taken out a notification this year. So most probably they will be taking out the notification maybe next year, or maybe in 2022. So you have to be on the lookout there. But your target should be to focus on IBPS SO exams. And if your preparation is good for the IBPS SO exam, then you can also try for the manager law post, and provided you have the experience, which is minimum 2 to 4 years. So that is something you have to look into.
Rightly. Okay. All right. So let's coming up to the next question. That is related with, as we have seen that every job comes up with some advantages and disadvantages, right? So could you please tell something about the pros and cons, which is related to, which is connected with the law managers, about the opportunities or perks which they receive. On the contrary, the disadvantages they face, and there's another question that is lined up, that is, do we have any state preference in this, or is this related to the central government examination, where they themselves put aspirant to their particular places? Yes, sir.
Yes, so I will just address the last question first. When you talk about the state preference, so firstly you have to know that the like banking service is basically an all India service. So you can be posted in any part of the country. So basically you do not have any preference as such in your posting. So once you are recruited, you will most probably go through a training program, and after which you will be directly given a posting letter or a joining letter wherein you will be informed where you are posted. So you will not be asked before you are given the letter as to what is your preference. But if you talk about the IBPS SO exam, as I had mentioned earlier, at the end of the application form, you will be asked for your preference of banks. So when you fill your preference for banks, you can most probably look at like the which bank has its headquarter in which state. For example, if you talk about Punjab National Bank, it is headquartered in New Delhi. If you talk about Central Bank, Bank of India, Bank of Maharashtra, uh, these banks have their headquarters in Bombay. Then if you talk about Corporation Bank and Syndicate Bank, of course they have merged now, but they had their headquarters in Karnataka. And then you have Indian Overseas Bank, Indian Bank, they have their headquarters in Chennai, in Tamil Nadu. So like if you you can, to a certain extent, you can uh, uh, you have a say on the which state you're posted if you give your preference for banks on the basis of their headquarters. But apart from that, but that is also not guaranteed. So even if you gets recruited to the post recruited by Indian Overseas Bank, although it has its headquarters in Chennai, it may give you a posting in maybe in Uttar Pradesh or maybe in New Delhi. So you really don't have a say in the posting and the preference of state. But having said that, once you are recruited as a manager, as a law manager in the banks, on certain grounds, on personal grounds, you can always be given up like a preference of posting. So so some of the grounds in which your preference for posting may be considered is, one is on the grounds of marriage. So if if you say that your spouse is posted in a particular city and you would like to be also posted in that same city, so that ground may be considered. Or maybe if you have if your parents are not well, and or various other family issues or personal grounds, they may be considered for posting. And more often than not, when you get promotion, you are invariably transferred. And apart from that also, like you cannot stay posted in a particular post or in a particular branch or maybe office for more than 6 years, because that is a requirement of the vigilance department. Every basically vigilance department is there in all banks, and they basically uh, they control the rotation of staff. So like even if you, for example, your like home city is maybe Allahabad, and you are posted there for some time, but after 6 years you will be transferred from there because of the vigilance regulation for rotation. And like when you are promoted, even like maybe you are there in a particular city for 3 years, and then you are promoted, because of course I forgot to mention that in banks you are eligible for promotion every 3 years. Okay, so like if you are in a city for 3 years and then you are promoted, then invariably you will be transferred. So you have, like when you are joining a bank, you have to be mentally prepared to stay in any part of the country. But you can always, there are certain mitigating grounds on which you are you may be given a preference in your posting, but more often than not, you will not be asked for any preference. And coming to the pros and cons of the job of law manager. So firstly, I will start with the cons. Basically, as I as you were you had pointed out that whether we have any preference with regard to state. So I think this, when I say it's an all India service and you do not have any preference, this can be considered as one of the cons. And the other con that is there is, basically there are no incentives. Like if you talk about maybe like law firms, or maybe if you talk about like private organizations, they have an incentive system wherein they they encourage people to perform well, and on the basis of their performance every year they're given a certain incentive in the form of maybe bonus, or in the form of some pay increase, pay hike. But this incentive is not present in public sector banks, not just banks, in mostly in like government and public sector organizations. So these are, I think, the two most important cons. Now, coming to the pros and the advantages of this job. Firstly, it's a very stable job. By stable job, I mean, like, once you are recruited in the position of a manager in a bank, it's very difficult. Like, nobody can, like, there is no policy of firing any employee. Okay, even if you want to fire an employee, you have to conduct a proper inquiry. A committee will be set up, which will, if there is any issue with regard to your if there are any complaints received, then a committee will be set up, which will prepare a charge sheet, and then there will be evidence and all. So the entire process of firing an employee may take from anywhere between 2 to 10 years. Okay, so it's very difficult, to like generally to fire a employee. So it's a very stable job. And also, if you talk about the present crisis that we are going through because of the COVID-19, so you will find that there are very few job cuts in the public sector banks. And they're also, like, they have also not done any pay cuts also. So that in that respect, the job, like the post of a law manager, is very stable as a job. Secondly, when you talk about perks, you have various perks. So firstly, if you talk about the salary, there is a component called the dearness allowance, which is also there in central government and mostly in the government and public sector organizations. So dearness allowance is something which is linked with uh, the inflation rate. So if the inflation rate increases, if the cost of general goods increase, so the DA percentage will also increase, and consequently your salary will also increase. So it is very dynamic in nature. And while in central government, the DA percentage is revised twice a year. So, but in case of banks, the DA percentage is revised every quarter. So every 3 months there will be a revision in the DNS allowance. So that is one aspect which is good, because your salary is very dynamic and it changes with the inflation. Secondly, you have various perks and allowances in the form of petrol allowances. Then you have house rent allowance. Then you have LTC, leave travel concession, insurance. Then you have various other allowances, like for furniture allowance. Then you have telephone allowance, entertainment allowance. So these are various things. They are basically not a part of your gross salary, but they are given separately, either on a self declaration basis, or like for in case of petrol allowance, you have to furnish the petrol bills, or in case of furniture allowance, you have to give the like the receipt of purchase of furniture. So when you do give these things, you will be given the allowance, which is mostly, like, most of the, like, petrol allowance is a monthly allowance, whereas furniture allowance is like once in every 5 years it's given. So there are a lot of perks and benefits, like newspaper allowance is also there. These are a lot of good things that you have in the salary structure. And then when we talk about as a pro, there's another advantage, which is the professional growth as a law manager, or generally as a manager or as an employee, because you are eligible for promotion every 3 years. And by the, like, 3 years, I am saying, like, the financial year. So like from 1st of April will be counted as a financial year, like in the year of 2000, like 2000, this present year, present financial year, from 1st of April of 2022 20, it will be counted as a financial year. And then the second financial will be counted in 1st April 2021. So on basically, like, your financial year keeps on increasing every year, and after 3 years you are eligible for promotion. So that is one advantage, because like, in for example, if you take the post of judges in some states, the promotion is done after every 5 years. So comparatively in banks, the promotions are faster. And secondly, the promotion is entirely merit based. So like, when you're eligible for promotion, you will be asked to sit for a written exam, and which carries a lot of weightage, and then you have an interview. And there is a certain weightage given to the annual appraisal of the previous 3 years, which is very less, on almost like around 20%. the remaining 80% of weightage is given to the written exam and the interview. So everything is based on merit. If you prepare well for the written exams, and if you are continuously updating your knowledge, then you can easily ace these exams, and you will get promoted. So like the professional growth is very high in banks. So I think these are the advantages and disadvantages of the job basically.
Right, so seems like there are so many advantages in comparison to disadvantages, and that will definitely help the aspirant to go for this particular job. So, sir, there is another question that is coming from Shiv Sai. That is SBI SO post is equal to SBI PO post, and what is the current status?
Yeah, so actually I had mentioned this, that uh, there's a distinction between SO and PO, and that is the distinction of specialization only. So a PO post is basically assistant manager of the generalist cadre. Okay, there are two cadres. One is the generalist cadre and the other is the specialist cadre. Under the generalist cadre, you have POs basically. PO means probationary officer. So like any assistant manager, like recruitment for assistant manager post is called a PO exam basically. Whereas like the SO post is same assistant manager but in the specialist cadre. So you have various specializations chartered accountancy, CS, law. So that is the only difference. But like their position in the hierarchy of the banks is same. Both PO and SO are assistant managers only. One will be called assistant manager, just assistant manager, and whereas lawyers will be called assistant manager law. There will be a that is a suffix that is added for the position. That's it. Otherwise the salary is same and everything else is same. But having said that, I will also mention that like if you are a specialist officer, like assistant manager law or manager law, you will remain a specialist officer till the post of chief manager. Okay, so after the post of chief manager there is no specialization. So it is very important that, so that is why I had mentioned earlier that um, once you join the bank, do not consider yourself as a lawyer. First consider yourself as a banker and then consider yourself as a lawyer, because you have to be very well versed with banking. You have to know banking, because at some point this is a very good advantage that like law managers have, that they will be posted in either like they will never be posted in the branches as assistant manager law. They will be posted in zonal offices, circle offices, regional offices, and also head offices. So the good thing is that you will be always posted in either a metro city or a tier 1 city. Okay, while when you talk about POs, they can be posted anywhere in the country and in branches mostly, because PO's role is primarily there in public dealing. So they will be posted in branches, and the branch can be anywhere in any village of Punjab, or it can be even in a metro city. It does not matter. So you can so that is an advantage, that as assistant manager law or as SO you have, you will be posted in a fairly good city, which will like help improve your like standard of living for you. But like once you become a chief manager, that is the last post where your specialization will be considered. Like you will be a chief manager law. But after that, once you're promoted to the post of AGM, there is no specialization. You are just an AGM. There are, of course, sometimes there are like specialized positions for like in the post of AGM and DGM. Like you have AGM law and DGM law, but there is just one post. So like if you have 10 law managers and they get promoted to the post of DGM, only one of them will be DGM law. The rest of them will be just DGMs, just generalist. They will become a part of the generalist cadre. And as specialist officers, you have an option of converting from the specialist cadre to the generalist cadre. Like maybe you are assistant manager law, and you get promoted to manager law, and then you decide that no, I want a faster growth, because as specialist officers, obviously like specialist officers positions are slightly less. So the promotion is like sometimes it may be delayed, because the number of positions are limited. But in the case of assist like the generalist, there is no such shortage of positions, and we require more like generalist officers than specialist officers. So you may at some point feel that I want to to, like, maybe you consider yourself a banker and you want to pursue a career in banking, and you don't want to limit yourself, so you have an option of converting from manager law to manager generalist. So that is a, so for that you have to appear for an exam. So so there is, like, when you talk about PO and SO, there is no difference, the positions are same.
Okay, so I believe that Shiv Sai has got their answer. So I have like taken up all the relevant questions so far. So before signing off, what advice you wanted to give to the students who are preparing for these services, and what are the do's and don'ts they should follow up? Yes, yes, sir. And meanwhile, I'll ask my viewers to rate this particular session from 1 to 10 as a feedback. Yes, yes, sir.
Yeah. So, when you talk about basically the, like, do's and don'ts, and the advice that I would like to give. Firstly, if you are interested in appearing for these exams, particularly, then I would suggest you start by working on your GK, and of course, like, English is something that you don't have to pay much attention to if your medium of instruction has been English from your school times. So you have to primarily give emphasis on GK, because GK is something that is very important, and like, there is both static and the, like, current affairs portion. So current affairs, while if you read newspapers and like, follow various websites daily, so you will be updated with the current affairs. But when you talk about the static portion, that is something that you will take some time to cover. So it is very important that you firstly start working on GK, and you have to try to do it daily. And when you talk about like the other portions, like for reasoning, and if there is quantitative portion, it is very important that you target certain kinds of questions. Like, in reasoning you have, for example, inequalities. For quant portion you have number series. These are very scoring, and you will, more often than not, you will be able to solve these kind of questions. So it is very important that you choose which are the subjects, or which are the areas that you are like, good at, and you will try to focus on those sections, because that will help you in fetching marks, and that will also help you in reducing your negative marking. And then when you talk about law, it's very important that you cover the barracks. You are well familiar with all the sections, all the important sections of all the acts, the general acts, and also the like, banking acts, which is the RBI Act, Banking Regulation Act, SURFACE Act, IBC, and also the Recovery of Debts Act. So if you are decided on preparing for these exams, and when you prepare for banking exams, as I mentioned earlier, you are also, like, eligible, and you can also appear for all the other public sector exams. So don't just confine yourself to banking, and you just appear for all the exams. Be on the lookout for the notifications, and try to appear for these exams. And the more exams you appear for, the better you are prepared for these kind of exams, because it really helps you in understanding your weaknesses, and which are the areas that you have to focus and improve on. So that is something that you will that will benefit you. And of course, there's another thing, that try to appear for as many mock papers and as many practice papers, question papers, that you can, because that will also help you in preparing, giving you the right mindset for these exams. It's very important. And I would suggest that like, if you don't crack these exams in your first attempt, don't be disheartened, because the most of these exams are, like, come on an annual basis, and there are so many PSUs that they keep recruiting. So every year you will have so many recruitments. So if you don't crack any particular exam, don't be disheartened, and be, like, continue your preparation, and you will definitely crack these exams. So this is my advice to all the viewers.
Right, so I believe that participants would definitely got a crucial, important insight on the career guide for this job as a law manager in Indian banking system. As we know that there are so many people who even don't know about this exam. So after watching this, they'll definitely get some insight. And there's this feedback that is coming up that we can have a detailed process for recruitment thing, right? So we can plan that particular webinar in some other day, in upcoming days, definitely. And oh, all right. So thank you so much, sir, for your time and your detailed procedure which you gave us. And thank you everyone for joining us. Meet us with someone other for next webinar. All right, so I'm signing off. Uh, all
Sure.
right, thank you. So
Okay.
I'm Anubhav Nagar, webinar executive.
Thank you so much.
Everyone, yes, sir.